Now then, we've been talking about trends and we've been talking about innovation throughout the whole of this conference. And I've been taking, as usual, copious notes and issues that have emerged from our various discussions over the last couple of days. The issue of commoditization, and as it was pointed out by somebody yesterday, commoditization without standardization is problematic. Oversupply, price pressure, always downwards, although as DSPs have said, their costs go up. You can't pay people less. Greater speed, people want things in real time, smaller scopes of work, scope creep, the issues of lump sum. Do we remix product services, rearrange them, rebundle them? How do we manage this issue? Mass customization, underinvestment in technology as an industry. Also meta themes, the very interesting topic that I'm very interested in increased life expectancy compounded with lower birth rates, which of course means instead of a population pyramid, we've now got a population cube. That's going to be very interesting for the labour market in years to come. All of these issues and more we're going to discuss this morning in a second session after the coffee break. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Bill Grable, here on my right, who needs no introduction to you, and Bob Rosen, further along from Dwellworks, for our little conversation. We've had a little bit of a conversation already, gentlemen, haven't we? And although many of you know, and most of you know, the two gentlemen involved, I think it's kind of interesting for the sake of context to understand how they've built their businesses so that we can get some idea of the trends they saw coming or were aware of, and perhaps predicated on those trends and understanding of those trends, they therefore built their business accordingly. So if I could start with you, Bill. You started off with a family business, in the trucking business, as I understand it, a great family business. If you could just go back and tell us briefly the history of your business, the trends you saw coming, and on the basis of those trends, why you decided to develop and change the direction of the business.
Sure, thank you. Our organization began in 1950 in a rather rural area in the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. And like many small businesses, its marketplace was really about a 50-mile radius. And what really spurred my father to think expansively was he started to have children and he wanted to buy an insurance policy, and he realized he couldn't afford the insurance policy based upon the market he was in, so he had to expand his market. So that kind of set in motion moving from a regional to then a national company, and along the way in about 1980, we chose to become our own van line. Long story short, we maintained, the focus of being a van line, but as the 80s led to the 90s and so forth, globalization was just starting. So we started to become more and more of like an international mover. And then as we got to the 2000s, it was very apparent that outsourcing was going to be the way that corporations would acquire the services. And so less and less we started having a direct relationship with the major US multinationals. And so we made the decision that we wanted to maintain a relationship and contact control, if you will, in those relationships. And we ourselves moved into the relocation management business. And we did that for a good 12, 13 years when we realized all of a sudden we needed a global presence. And so about 4 years ago, we had to make a difficult choice, which was to say become less US-centric in the infrastructure and the warehouses and the trucks and the labor, and really focus our efforts going forward on expanding our global footprint and becoming, if you will, a pure relocation management company. Because fundamentally, we wouldn't be relevant if we didn't have a certain footprint, a certain capability of self-performance throughout all the regions of the world. So for the last 4 years, we've been very active in expanding the organization throughout the different geographies. And, it's one day at a time and one step ahead of the other. But I guess in summary, people talk about disruption. And in a unique way, we've kind of disrupted ourselves. And the most recent iteration was like the fourth time we've disrupted ourselves. And I suspect there's another disruption of ourselves yet to come. And we've kind of gone from Grable 1.0 and through what I call Grable V.1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now we're kind of inventing Grable 2.0. And in a very short context, 2.0 is just to be digital, to be global, and at the end of the day, try to find the sweet spot intersection of high tech and high touch.
Very interesting. High tech and high touch. So the trends you saw coming were globalization and the need really to be in a global market. You've built your business slightly differently, haven't you, Bob? I mean, tell us a little bit about the story and the antecedents of Dwellworks.
Sure. So the Dwellworks was born out of my experience at Serva. I ran a competing company to what Bill now has run for many years at Serva. And the idea that came out of that was there were a number of things that our customers asked us to do as part of the relocation process that we either built or bought, and in retrospect, we should have outsourced. And so the idea then for Dwellworks, and it was originally called Relocation Support Services. I think it's actually still the legal name of the business, but heavy emphasis on support in that we were going to target our old employer, Serva, and their peers, Grable and the other RMCs, to be our customer, and then we would build a variety of downstream functions that they required, and then we would make it available to all of them. And I think some of the themes that came out of that were, those businesses that we either built or bought while we were at Serva, we didn't have enough volume ourselves to make them profitable, or we weren't great at those businesses, and we would have been better off outsourcing or investing in technology for them. There wasn't enough volume to justify the ROI on some of those investments. So we had the sense that if we had that issue, the other RMCs would as well, and we would target them as our customers. So that's how we started it, and we've continued to build it over the last 12 years. That was 2007 that happened, and it really has been built on the back of asking our customers great questions. I always invoke Eileen Chait's name at this point. She was the president, the founder of the first DS company that we bought. And she said, ask great questions, shut up, and listen. And I think it's great advice, and I think that our company continues to live by that. And we ask our customers, what do you need? Where do you have a pain point? And then we assess whether or not we can bring value to that. And so over time, like Bill, we started in the Americas, we started in the US, primarily in DS. We do a couple other services like valuation for the home buyout process in the States and property management and so forth. But then we started to globalize, and we started with an America strategy, and then we jumped over to Europe, and now we're in Asia as well. So it's been a fun run. In addition to serving the RMCs, we've taken that footprint now. Necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, in order to increase revenues and so forth, we've thought about how do we leverage that footprint, the infrastructure, and so forth. And so we've started to serve the corporate housing companies in the same way that we serve the RMCs.
You mentioned that very interesting concept, pain point. I mean, this is the basis of all innovation. You find where the customer has a pain point, and if you can manage that pain point, you're in business, even if it means that you've got to come up with some new solution. Right. I mean, what have you identified, both of you, as pain points for the current consumer and the future consumer, possibly?
Want to go? Pain point for the consumer, the end user, which is really, I mean, I think one of the issues as an industry, we tend to forget who the real customer is. It's the people that actually use the service. We get kind of wrapped up in our own relationships and the HR at the corporation and so forth. But I mean, the end user, defined back from them, right? And really, if you can get to them and do real research around what their needs are, and this whole kind of categorization by age groups and so forth, I think is probably the wrong way to think about it. It's more how people consume things. And people that are 59 can consume things the same way 25-year-olds. I know how they grew up and all that stuff. But the reality is we're all consuming and accessing our information in different ways.
It's the key thing.
And so you have to build, but not everybody enjoys or appreciates that. So you have to build your products in different deliveries, different modes of delivery and so forth. But I think the speed is obviously a big deal. Simplicity. People don't like complex things. They want it simplified for them. And then the ability to pick and choose what they want. And so those are the trends that, historically our industry has really overprescribed, a menu, a statement of work, and, it's boom, 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 it's a checklist. And the reality is that may not be that interesting to the end customer. It's really, it makes it simpler to deliver the service and price it and collect money and, all the things that we do. But at the end of the day, it may not be serving what the customer actually.
It's a point well made that a 21-year-old and a 31-year-old and a 41-year-old, they want the same things, but the way people access things is changing dramatically. The way we used to access things is not the way an 18-year-old is accessing things, and we'll come on to that point later. What are your insights on pain points in the business?
Yeah, interesting, Francis. Clients hire us for the purposes of being a global program manager, and so then you step back and you say, well, what are their objectives? And there's probably 3 or 4 pillars. One of them is they want consistency in the transferee experience because they have an employment brand. And, in the past, they maybe had a tri-regional model, and HR or business unit leaders would have kind of the own nuance of how somebody would be served and under what kind of policies in their relocation. But the reality is people cross geographies. And so, what once went on in, let's say, Latin America, and this is the style of how an employee would be treated there, now they relocate to Europe, and it could be an entirely different experience, and it may or may not influence whether that person would be willing to relocate again for the client. So one part of global program management is certainly consistency of experience that ties off with the objectives of the employment brand. Another, and there's just a rapid acceleration of the need for this, is all things compliance on a global level, right? And so whether it's taxation, whether it's labor law, data, it certainly is a very complex landscape. And again, these companies are generally publicly traded, and an embarrassing issue in one region of the world could have a very adverse impact. And people who relocate are often very high on the food chain, and that draws attention. And whether it's suppliers who aren't, don't take this wrong, legitimate and could have things go afoul in their geography, and then it's discovered that the corporate client engages somebody in that geography that is doing all sorts of bribes or doesn't pay their taxes or whatever bad things are going on there, that can end up in the Wall Street Journal. That's not a good thing. And then now even more, with more velocity and speed, is this need to aggregate the data, to assess and really analyze the data and come to the conclusion of, okay, where are we most successful at recruiting people, deploying people, under what kind of policies, upon arrival, how fast do they assimilate into their teams, as well as the community? And because the more successful they are assimilating into the community, the more focus they have on their job, and the more ability they have to give to proficiency faster. And so ultimately, that's the ROI on the equation for the corporation. So obviously that's a macro lens, but in the era of globalization and consistency of delivery, experience, brand, mitigation of risk, you put all that together and it makes a very complex but fascinating opportunity.
You bring me then with a seamless segue to this issue that's come up on multifarious occasions throughout the course of the last couple of days, of this lump sum issue. Like, you're a 28-year-old in Palo Alto, Mr. Google says, here's $20,000, go sort yourself out in Mumbai. Who wouldn't take the money, right? They need the money. And then they get to Mumbai, they realize, they really didn't know what they were doing, and they're back on the phone and not integrating, as you say, and not hitting the deck running and not being part of the team. What are the issues surrounding this lump sum? I mean, is this a pain point for the industry? Because a lot of people are confronted with that issue.
Oh boy. My take on that is, on the one hand, it's a very efficient way for corporations to contain budget, right? And then the issue becomes managing escalations to the person once they get to Mumbai and they realize, oh my gosh, now we have a duty of care. This person isn't, fundamentally engaged at this point with their responsibilities. They're trying to navigate life, right? So on the front end, it looks to be a very good, easy, fast, consistent application. In some ways, depending on the destination location, it could be rather much a non-event. But in a lot of complex destinations, it becomes very difficult, I think, for the transferee And, I recall a time that I was part of a panel, and there were two clients, one from a high-tech company and one from a major defense company. And the question was around customer experience, and the woman from the high-tech company said, "Oh my gosh, before I came on stage, I just received an escalation call, and somebody was complaining about the thread count in the sheets." And on the other hand, the person from the defense company said, "Our value proposition with our employees is if you get a stone for a pillow and a burlap sack for a blanket, your needs have been met. Move on and get going." So in my opinion, it really comes down to where does the client, and they need to have clarity about where they stick the peg in this continuum of support for the transferee. So a lump sum and person bumbling around in Mumbai and not having a clue of how to get settled, that might be just fine in terms of the value proposition an employer has set. And it really comes down to expectations, quite frankly. But unfortunately, a lot of the times, I think corporations kind of speak with two voices. Every corporation in the world will tell you, our employees are our most valuable asset. And it's true. I mean, what business functions without great human capital, right? But whether it's nurturing, whether it's ensuring their security and safety and so forth, different companies have a different place they want to set the peg on that continuum.
I think you had something to say about this. You've even financed research, haven't you? Because
Yeah.
you need hard data to make points to people. You financed research on the different experiences between the lump sum assignee and the person who's managed otherwise. Haven't you done that?
Yeah, I mean, our industry, the lump sum has had a significant impact on revenue streams as it kind of chips away at that traditional model that you talked about a couple of questions ago. But it's also a much bigger marketplace, right? And so it is really an opportunity, it can be an opportunity for us to expand our business, and you use the word remix, and take the things that we know, the institutional knowledge we have, the products and so forth, and remix those in ways. But we also, as an industry, tend to drink our own bathwater. And so we went outside the industry, outside of our four walls, and independently funded research. And I think other people are starting to do this as well, as opposed to surveying your existing customers, but going to people, true consumers that are moving on their own, and really assessing trends and needs, and identifying those. And instead of repackaging the things that we have done historically in a traditional manner, assembling services and products in a different way, and presenting them in a different way. And so I think it does, Bill, you talked about, the compliance piece and some of the elements that are required, and somebody that's moving doesn't know what they don't know about those things. So, I mean, I think it lends to, from a policy perspective, some of the people call it core flex or those kinds of things. So there are certain things that a corporation can define and as part of the benefit and program and onboarding or whatever. But then the rest of it can be very flexible in terms of utilization by the individual. And then the key is, how do you present it to them? How do you assess what their needs are and do that in a way that is timely? You hit them at the points in time that they need those services, from the day they find out they're moving till the day they leave the assignment and head back home, because along that whole timeline, there's a variety of things that they need to access. And so I think that's where we need to remix, if you will, and take the things that we know and then tweak them, repackage them, and from the research really, and then it gets into AI and really, capturing data on people's actual utilization, satisfaction with the things that they have, and then in a very lean and agile way, continuously tweaking. And you think about that, every app you use, you don't even know it, but it's continuously being improved. And that's the way that we need to define and build services that in a different way than we have historically, where we had, again, teams, statements of work, contracts, very regimented and so forth. I think everybody in that whole ecosystem is going to have to learn how to flex and be continuously improving based on information. And we don't gather the information well. So, I mean, you talk about, I mean, jump forward to AI. AI on what? We don't have really good information historically in our industry. We've got a lot of big mainframe systems and so forth that weren't built. When they were built, we didn't think about that. And so, I mean, that's, I think, foundationally things that we need to get after before we can really, you know, make big leaps and bounds in terms of utilization of the data and presenting it to our customers for, you know, their own policy design.
There's this big issue of mass customization. It's basically an a la carte menu rather than a table d'hôte. Very interesting. You've made the point, both of you, about historically there has been underinvestment in this industry. I mean, do you think, okay, nowadays everybody, oh, compliance, we better do something, but if you're just going to implement technology to conform with compliance, that really isn't enough. You have to have a return on your investment and you have to be satisfying some customer need. What's your take on sort of the need for more sort of judicious use of technology in the business?
I mean, I think related to compliance, there is a ROI on it. I think it's called continuation of our reputation.
Stay in business, yeah.
You know, I mean, we you know, people kind of check that box and don't really think about it seriously. It's you know, price of admission, whatever. I mean, it's our responsibility to the people that we're moving around the world to make sure that, and their employers and their families and our own company, that we have a sustainable company, and that one time you're in the Wall Street Journal or on the front page of the paper or whatever, that's not a happy place to be. So, you know, I think that one thing is the industry needs to, you know, continue to be front and center. I think we could collaborate more on how to define what those things are and share best practice, but it's more than price of admission from our perspective. Related to technology investment, when we talked yesterday or the day before as we prepared for this, I mean, we definitely as an industry have way underinvested in technology historically. And Bill, you had a good take on it, like kind of post-recession 2008, 2009, some of the different impacts and reasons why maybe we've gotten to this technical debt, if you will. But we've got a lot of foundational things to do before we can really take full advantage of you know, some of the new technologies that are in existence today or will be hitting, things like blockchain and AI and virtual reality and stuff like that, which sounds great, but we've got foundational stuff to do. You know, just simple APIs between, you know, our field people, our systems, your systems, the HRIS system of the corporation, to be able to, you know, instantaneously connect those pieces of data, where historically value has been defined by how quickly you can convey that by people. Yeah, I mean, and so it's not eliminating people, it's allowing them or enabling them to focus on, you know, some of the more difficult cases, or, you know, to really assess what people's needs are in a, you know, isolated case, as opposed to doing that on each and every one that's kind of flowing through the system in an efficient way. So, I mean, it's not just taking costs out, it's taking work out.
Yeah,
and that means process design and hard coding that in, you know, technologies, and just speed up the flow of information.
Well, that's a point well made, that technology is not necessarily taking jobs away. No. It's taking grunt work away. Right. You know, let the system take the sweat so that the people can do what they do best, which is delivering excellent personal service. Yeah. But you've got to take on that one too, Bill.
Yeah, well, I think part of the reason our industry collectively has a bit of technical debt, you know, if you look historically, the majority of the infrastructure is largely private family-owned businesses that are really specialized and nuanced in local environments. And so then, you know, the marketplace, the corporate consumers, you know, their needs have accelerated really fast globally, right? And so as a program manager, if you will, we're employed to hopefully assemble or aggregate and create, again, the experience, the collection of data so that the analysis and identification of where their money is best spent and what policies or so forth and so on. And there has been some response in the industry to, if you will, roll up different segments. And in some ways, it's interesting because a little bit of the nuance, the art, the personalization, the contact, I think in some ways is reducing the employee experience. And yet more and more of the corporate needs are being met, whether from compliance or employment brand and all of that. So going forward, again, that's where I think you have to strike that balance between high tech and high touch. But I think APIs is basically the enabler going forward. And
it's not fancy. I mean, it's pretty nitty gritty, but it's required.
Yeah. So unlike so many industries, you compare it to the airline industry or the hotel industry, these have, for the most part, been dominated for years by large public, frankly, global organizations. Right. And we're starting from a basis of hundreds, if not thousands, of fine firms all over the world that need to be orchestrated into the successful experience for the transferee and the customer. And that journey takes a little longer, and coming out of the Great Recession, there was a huge contraction in our industry, and that occurred then simultaneously with margin compression. And if you will, for private family firms who are running their business out of their savings accounts, basically, it was scary. And so naturally, there wasn't an accelerating rate of investment as fast as technology was evolving.
Completely understandable, completely understandable. You mentioned price compression downwards. I mean, this is really a constant leitmotif throughout the conference. What's to be done? What's to be done? I mean, the remixing, repackaging, reworking things, technology taking the grunt work out of the process. But what else can be done about those issues? How do we sort of, because DSPs themselves keep saying to me, yeah, my prices are what I'm receiving is going down, but I've got fabulous people around me, their wages and salaries are going up, so margins shrinking. Yeah. What do we do about that? Is the market too big? Are we going to see a reduction in people in the business?
Well, fundamentally, I think that occurs because there's oversupply.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of people just hanging on. And, it's sad in a way because there are so many family businesses that make up the front lines and the first and final mile of this industry, right? And in some cases, there aren't great exit strategies either, right? And so it gets very emotional and personal in some regards, where people have worked a lifetime, they've been successful players in their communities, and they suddenly realize that they maybe don't have a natural successor. Nobody's knocking on their door. And it's, I guess it's a nostalgically sad time in many regards. But there's no question, you got to follow the money, and the customers have the money. And so when it's all said and done, they want more for less. And that's the way of the world. As every consumer out here in the room, you want more for less, so how can you expect a corporation to behave any different than the common mindset of every individual inside that company, right? And they're in intensely hyper-competitive industries themselves, and so if they aren't super scrupulous in terms of are we, spending the least amount and getting the most amount of value, they then are at a competitive disadvantage in their industries. So I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think there has to be a constant, conscious effort to examine your workflow, look at the intersections of where your work lets off and somebody else's begins, and then how do you find a way to not just for one entity to reduce their cost structure, but simultaneously enable both to lower their cost structure. And then in an ideal world, both hang on to some increment of margin, but in the practical world, it enables you at least to remain competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where you just ended there, I think is really a critical thing, and where we think about it is, not just taking cost out, because indeed I think there already has been consolidation in the industry, and that should continue as in reaction to kind of the place and time that we're at. And I'm not anti-entrepreneur, I am one at heart, but it's hard, it is. And it's not just small companies. I think everybody's got cost pressures as it relates to that. But what, Bill, you touched on at the end there is really the whole process thing and hanging on to things that we used to do. It really requires, there's a point in time, we always have an ongoing responsibility to continue to be more efficient and effective in what we do. I mean, you think about a TV set, you don't pay, $5,000 for a 60-inch TV anymore. You pay $800 or $300 or something. Those companies have figured out ways to, streamline the supply chain, the materials, and so forth. So you apply that to our business, we got to think about that continuously. What are the overlaps, and how do we get those overlaps out and checking each other? One of the ways is through automation. I think one of the interesting things is that each individual small and medium-sized business may not be able to build all these technologies themselves, but you do see people entering the space to provide software solutions and technology to many customers. And so if people can embrace and adapt some of those things, and there's a number of them at this conference and other conferences we go to, starting to pop up in our industry, that allows us to access those things on a more cost-effective way than building everything ourselves. And I think that's a mindset shift that has to occur. People always wanted to own all their technology and store it in their own servers in their own building and stuff. And there's so many opportunities to do that more efficiently and effectively today. And you
So
just gotta
we've
learn
talked
about
about
it and embrace
we've talked about outsourcing, we've talked about remixing, we've talked about sort of price compression. There's one meta theme, and then I really do want to open the floor for questions. We have about 15, 20 minutes for questions. One meta theme that we didn't really touch on the other day, but I think it's terribly important. Extended life expectancy. I think the average male American in 1900, I did my stats the other day, lived to about 50. Now a baby born today will be living to 100. My view is there'll be more transitions in and out of work, in and out of upskilling, in and out of... The labor market will not be the way the labor market is now. Equally, we have a drop in the birth rate in what we call sort of developed countries, okay? So instead of having this pyramid, we are going to have a cube. What ramifications do you guys see about this cube? You're going to have interesting workforces. People are going to have to work longer because working for 30 years for the vast majority of people isn't going to fund a 40-year retirement. It's not going to, unless you're extraordinarily lucky. So there's going to be a very interesting dynamic now of blended workforces, older people, fewer younger people supporting that. What impact do you see having on the mobility industry, that phenomenon?
I think, one of the things is you got to go to where the work is, right? And that people may not want to jump around and move their whole family that much. So the notion of, short-term assignments or extended business travelers or just gig workers that are on their own and moving about the planet. And so thinking about, what does that do to us? I mean, it nibbles away at the core of what has traditionally been our work, but it creates a tremendous opportunity and huge volumes and high velocity of moves that if we can figure out a way to tweak and twist our knowledge, our historical institutional knowledge about things, and then repackage that in ways that serve people. I mean, maybe they don't need in a destination services vernacular, a 3-day, tour looking at places to live. They need a 1-hour area orientation and, find the grocery store and this and that, or maybe a meet and greet at the corporate housing, the temporary living quarters, or whatever the case may be. It's knowledge we have, networks we have, local information that people will want to access very quickly, and we just need to figure out how to present it to them in a way that's, useful and fast and simple and all those things we talked about earlier.
Remixing.
Yeah, and I think it's the shortage of talent is clearly a big deal, and I mean unemployment's fundamentally zero for the people that we address. globally, you know, and so people are going to move around for more money, but they don't want to move their whole family, and there's definitely ways for us to participate in that.
Yeah.
You got any thoughts on that one, Bill?
You know, I look at it in two different contexts. You know, who are the consumers and then who are the workforces, right? So from a consumer's point of view, futurists, you know, and who knows who's got the best crystal ball, right? But basically they're saying, you know, in just the next few years, like 1 out of 6 people on the planet will change a residence every year, right? And so that can be on one end of the spectrum, you know, a university student changes a dorm room every year. On another end of the spectrum, you know, people move from their primary residence to a nursing home or whatever, right? So I don't know how much either one of those represent a market segment for our industry, but everywhere in between represents some potential, right? And then weaving in the notion that Bob brought in, the gig workforce, you know, now futurists will tell you that, you know, somewhere in the range of 35-40% in just a few years will be gig workers. So now you throw the compliance lenses on all that, right? And so these are people not even having any level necessarily of corporate support. And not only do they have to figure out the immigration, how are they going to figure out their pensions? You know, and then the basics of housing and food and gainful employment, and where's their bank account, and how are their taxes applied? And people are going to need a ton of assistance at some point. They may be completely naive today, and in a way, they aren't going to realize what support they need until the tax man comes knocking on their door, or they're trying to get medical coverage in a given market, and sorry, we can't serve you, right? So in a way, much, much different than we construct and conceive how can we support mobile workforces of the future. I have to believe there are just a variety of new services yet to be invented, deployed, and accessible, you know, really on your mobile device.
There you
right?
are.
I mean, this is the marketplace
That's the way.
that fundamentally, you know, you look at Uber as an example, that need to get people from one place to another always existed. It was horribly inefficient. It was horribly variable, right? And as consumers, I don't think we're going to stand for that anymore. And we're going to expect that kind of ease and a certain amount of consistency, and then the certain amount of security, which increasingly is a part of Uber's value prop, right? I think we'll see that emerging maybe 10 years out. Who knows how fast that will get here. But so I find that fascinating, right? And to remain curious and be a student of parallel industries and things like that, right? The pivot is over to the workforces. And there's no question, as employers, we're going to have to be more open-minded with respect to diversity and, you know, I don't know if I'll say this quite right, but to remove our sense of ageism with respect to at what age is somebody probable or competent in doing something. And I guess to just close this topic out real quickly, I'm constantly reinforcing with our workforce, and in part because much of our senior executive team within the next 10 years retires. And so I'm very consciously communicating inside, look, your number one job right now is to be mentors, but you're also to be mentees.
Yeah.
Because, you know, unless you're 2 years out from retirement, you better be continuously learning and, frankly, curious about acquiring new skills. Because if you stay steady state today, within the next 2 years, more than likely the job you're doing today won't exist, and it'll require new skill sets and familiarity with technology. And if you don't get on that train, oh my gosh, your employability at the income level you have today is probably not sustainable. And then that undermines your whole retirement strategy, right? So, big topic we could probably spend all morning on.
The rest of the day on this one. This is my pet topic. But anyway, questions from the floor, please. I'm sure we're going to have plenty. If you could just put your hand up, and we've got some roving mics here. Thanks, Brian. Gentleman here in a blue sweater.
Good morning. I'm Leo Alexanderson from Thailand. We have clearly seen a concentration of the big wholesale providers, and it's ongoing. And now we're also seeing some concentration at the retail level. The small mom and pop retail stores are closing down and they're being eaten up or merged with other bigger companies. What do you see in the future of the opportunities for the small mom and pop relo stores?
Well, I mean, I think people start businesses all the time for different things. They see an opportunity in the marketplace, they see an unfulfilled need, and so I think that there are opportunities for people to continue to be entrepreneurs, but be different than, focus on different things than you have historically. I mean, I think the notion of us hanging on to, you know, as a DSP, for example, what I said before about a 3-day assignment or a 5-day assignment, whatever the traditional thing that we built our businesses on, it's gone. I mean, it's not gone, but in terms of a growth industry, that's history. So I think that there's viability for people as they think up new ideas, and you see different companies show up at this, that it'd be interesting to look at the roster of who's here now and who was here 10 years ago. There's a lot of entrepreneurs coming into the space, looking to fulfill unmet needs. And so that's where I would focus on if I was starting some today. It's like, where's the unmet need? Not more Me Too, less Me Too strategies and more hitting things that are unfulfilled.
Yeah, where's the pain point? Yeah. Or what's unmet? Very interesting, yeah. Have you got anything to say about this one, Bill?
Well, at the risk of being cliche, you know, I think content aggregation and accessibility on demand through any device is the expertise we bring when it comes to local areas, right? And so whether it's neighborhoods, whether it's, you know, lifestyle choices, whether it's, you know, any variety of things. How do you register in a given environment to be legally residing there, right? So now it becomes, okay, you have this unique specialization. How do you surface that to a marketplace that any one of hundreds of millions of people could access, right? And that's the chunky landscape we're living in right now today. What, if you will, DSPs represent in this world is one of the most intense caregiving group of people that you could imagine. You know, this industry is underappreciated for the duty of care, the compassion, the accountability, the agility that they provide, meeting the unique needs of people from all walks of life with all levels of ability that plop onto their doorstep, right? And so that one unique characteristic or strength is irreplaceable and invaluable. The issue is, how does that get into the commercial mainstream and in a way that your goodness is easily found?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the battle, that's the weird part, that's the unprecedented landscape that we're all living in.
Yeah.
And what are the other ways that you could use that skill? What are the other things that you could use that skill outside of the space that we all live in? I mean, it is a unique set of skills and knowledge, and there's a human element of it, of the empathy and so forth. What are the other applications of that in the future world that people could build businesses around?
Exactly.
You know, mothers are still going to love babies, right? And when people relocate, they're going to need nurturing to be successful in their new landscape. That need will never go away, but the manner in which it is accessed and delivered, you know, now we're talking crystal ball gazing, and I don't think anybody has a patent answer on that. In essence, I think the main thing is to remain curious and vulnerable. And once you realize that you're vulnerable, that's the mother of invention.
Yep. Yeah. And walk in somebody else's shoes, as I have done, and feel that pain point. Be a relo person and feel the issues of which you speak. It's absolutely true. It's people with kindness and compassion. How can you monetize that? Further questions from the floor, please. Sorry, it's difficult to see with the light, gentleman there.
Hello, I'm Milton Bennett from the Intercultural Development Research Institute. So I've heard you speak very persuasively about creating more cost-effective and creative ways of providing services. I'm wondering if you're also considering creating new value. That another way of receiving compensation, of course, rather than simply cutting costs and increasing margin, is to create new products or in some other way generate new revenue. So I'm wondering if, particularly as you consider the ability of technology to create big data, if your access to the particular knowledge base that is traditionally associated with relocation might allow you to generate some kind of new value back to corporations, direct clients, in a compensatable way.
Well, my take on that would be a couple of fold. You're right. We gather some really interesting data, and if you scrub out the PII, it's really rich and valuable content, let's say, to various entities and new markets, right? One of the things we know about relocating is probably one of the most common things bought at destination is a mattress. And yet most, in our case, corporations pay for the transferee to buy a new mattress, or excuse me, to ship their mattress. So, you know, part of it is a consulting lens, which as you aggregate data and say, look, people are buying new mattresses at the other end. Why don't you exclude mattresses from the relocation policy as just a silly example. But then, you know, another pivot would be the gig economy, right? And the difficulty for people to have portability of pensions and medical coverage and things of that nature. I'm not aware of anybody that's really, you know, jumped out into the lead and has been this ecosystem or central nervous system that's easy for a gig worker to attach to and come in and out of, but keep those streams of delivery going. And I think that's certainly a market opportunity that is going to emerge on, you know, if you will, a global scale. And there will be brands, just like there are brands for insurance or brands for banking. Yeah. You're probably going to have brands emerge that provide an entire array of financial service, of healthcare services, you know, retirement planning, and all of that. Those are kind of over the arc or the horizon that you can see right now, but I think that's all inevitable. And, you know, for a company like ours, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, do we have to let go of the rung we're currently holding on to reach for the next one? And when I talk about potentially disrupting ourselves, you know, it may be that in order to retain the interest of major corporations, and if a third of their workforce is giggers, and they have a population that needs to relocate traditionally and a population that relocates with lump sum, but then a part of their workforce is made up of giggers, if you don't have that utility, you know, you're kind of two-thirds of a solution for them. So that's at least part of the way that I start process looking into the future of adding new value.
I mean, it's a great question. I think going back to the lump sum thing, or just consumers in general that are moving, you know, we tend to, in the traditional sense, deliver our services. I'm moving, I've moved, boom. The statement of work is over in 60 days. And yet the activity of mobility for the assignee, their family, their partner, whoever they have with them themselves, if they're by themselves, continues over the whole assignment. So, you know, thinking about you're an interculturalist, there's a lot of people that have loneliness issues, mental health issues, and so forth through at different points in the assignment. You don't know when that is. It's not in the first 60 days. You're excited about going there, and maybe there's some anxiety, but you don't know, you don't experience that loneliness until you're 3,000 miles away from your family or 5,000 miles away from your family, and that might be 6 months, a year and 6 months into the assignment. So the ability to, you talked about increasing the opportunity for revenue streams. If we opened our minds to the things that we know don't have to occur in a 60-day window. They can occur over a period of time and really be valuable in terms of increasing the effectiveness, the return on that assignment. We all know that there's, you know, stats, mostly anecdotal stats. I think they're not really that say, you know, most assignments fail because of, you know, unhappiness or the inability to assimilate into the new environment. Why not, you know, create that opportunity to deliver that over a longer period of time? And in different ways. It's not necessarily putting somebody in a room with an interculturalist for 2 days and lecturing them. It's, you know, can I access things on an app, or can I access things on a portal and videos, or can I have access to a professional, you know, to talk about things? And then the next jump that they're going to make. You talked about mattresses. So, I mean, to really apply analytics and data to moving the mattress. And maybe that's bad news for the moving folks, but maybe they need to tweak their model and figure out, how do I deliver smaller bits of people's goods in a more efficient manner than we have historically. And people will accept, I think, you know, not having to have a white gloves treatment of that, you know, if they're in that kind of an environment. So, you know, to expand that over the time. So, you know, a year in, hey, maybe they're going to move again. Think about getting out in front of that, from renewing their lease and helping them through that. All of these things that people face that are related to the move, but happen outside of the window of that 60 days or 3 months or whatever it is before you get there.
Very good.
You know, Francis, one of the things that I think will emerge is this notion of relocation services access through subscriptions. You know, there's this whole subscription economy, and I challenge any one of you out there, do you really have a handle on how many monthly subscriptions you're paying?
Yeah.
Right? Just what are on your iPhone or on your whatever phone you use, right? I mean, we've all got sucked in to just hit the button and it's $1.99 a month or $10.99 a year or whatever. So this notion of like relocation software as service kind of platform, again, we're all just on the fringes. It's as if we've just discovered electricity, but we haven't figured out how to apply it in all the forms of our life for our benefit. And that's just about where we're at. Somebody around here has invented a light bulb, which is great, because now we don't need candles or sunlight to see what we're reading. But now that there's electricity, what can we do with it? And now that there are subscriptions, I guess my point is, what can this industry do with that?
Gentlemen, we're slightly overrunning. Are you prepared to take one more question? We started a bit late. I'll take one more question in the middle there. Gentleman with a red tie in the middle. Thanks, Bryony. And then we'll wrap it up. Thanks. But we started 10 minutes late and the conversation's going. So. Oh, sorry, Bryony.
That's okay.
Thank you.
My name is Amobi Osuzugbe from Nigeria. It's actually a good opportunity to learn from those who have made it in this industry. And my concerns have always been on the critical or fundamental areas that one can address in terms of identifying the target market in this industry. You see, we have that leverage of having a population in our own, area of coverage. We're talking of 180 million people. But then we have always tried to concentrate on the corporations and embassies, diplomats, and the rest of them. But there's a whole lot of markets. Now, from their experience, how do you actually identify these target markets where you can be able to get them together and then generate a whole volume? We wish to learn from their experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the...
Identifying target markets, and how do you generate business from identifying new targets?
Different than I think a lot of it is what we've kind of talked about here is to take a step back from what you've traditionally served and put that aside. One of the things we've started to do when we're designing products, for example, we've brought in people from outside our industry to do that. And I use we drink our own bathwater a lot. I think that's one of the things that in order to really define new markets and new places to sell, maybe bring in, whether, if you're a small organization, you can't afford to hire this, but you could certainly outsource consultants and so forth from outside to really ideate around what are other ways to apply the services that you have. And it's not necessarily the information and so forth to focus on mobility, but maybe other things that are tangential or adjacent to mobility might open whole new markets. But I think the key to identifying it is probably to look beyond the four walls of your business to find them. Meaning bring new people into the business, consultants from outside the business, other advisors, because we all, I mean, I know I'm guilty of it constantly. You end up getting to the same conclusion. Oh, we're going to sell more of this to our existing customers. And if there's a lid on that, if there's a growth lid on our existing customers and where those opportunities are, you've got to really force creativity, and a lot of times that comes from outside forces.
What a point well made. Who's the Uber of Relo? You know, that
Right.
kind of, what are the platforms with the products we have and the knowledge we have that we can repackage, remix, and create a completely new experience and market? What's your take on this?
Well, maybe a little bit higher level here, and at least sharing with you how I approach the unknown of the future, and that is follow the money, and have a curiosity around why are money flows shifting relative to the traditional form of your business, and then what are some ways that you could mimic how other entities have been successful in catching up to where the new flow of money is going. And then the real issue is determining where is the source of that money. And because that's ultimately the entity that you want to best understand. And then determine, where are you a primary receiver of that money where it originates, or are you a secondary or a tertiary recipient of that money? And that first dollar of expenditure is going to be spent for different reasons in the future, and we're seeing it today, than it has been perhaps in the past. So it kind of comes back to this notion I mentioned before. To be successful in the future, you have to begin today by being ultra curious and committed to educating yourself in areas you have no knowledge of. And I know for myself, I thought I was done kind of learning after you graduate college. But oh my gosh, if you're not drinking from the fire hose today of information relevant to your business, start getting thirsty.
I want to say, Bill, I mean, you always talk about lifelong learning. Every time I've heard you speak, you talk about it, and you actually do it. And so hats off to you for doing that, because you're right. We've had people in our company, on our board, and so forth, and they become irrelevant. And they become irrelevant because they don't do what you do. And so, I mean, I think that whole curiosity, my gang is sick of me talking about blockchain, for example. I really think that, I mean, everybody thinks, oh, it's Bitcoin. It has nothing to do with cryptocurrency. It's the technology that drives that. But that could be 10 years from now a massive enabler and or disruptor to what we do. Well, what we do is manage supply chains to deliver services. That's the perfect application for that technology, and on a global basis, and so I think that, I think about things like that, and
Wow.
that's where I do spend my time reading, is on stuff like that, because that's what's going to affect our business really in the
Distributed
coming
and
years.
securitized ledger. What an interesting
Yeah.
concept. Listen, I could continue here all day. I have actually had a masterclass in transformational leadership with you two gentlemen over the past couple of days. You show curiosity and humility and that ability to look for pain points, look for gaps in the market, and say, what's your problem? I don't care, I'm going to find you a solution, and that is clearly the basis of your success in this business. Thank you very much for sharing that with us this morning.